Hi everyone, and welcome to our presentation on inspiring action by presenting your test results in your web analytics tool. And welcome to the Analytics Summit. We're super sad that we don't get to celebrate this awesome event with you in Nashville, but we're pretty pumped that we still get to virtually share with you what we like to call the Experimenter's Guide to Sharing Test Learnings to Creating More of Those Light Bulb Moments with Your Stakeholders. And if you're an analyst, you know exactly how special those moments are, where you're sitting across the table from your stakeholder, or I guess nowadays sitting on a Zoom call with your stakeholder, and you share a nugget of wisdom from your analysis, and all of a sudden you start to see this little glimmer in their eyes, and maybe even a little smile starts to crack, and it's because you've just unlocked something for them. Maybe you've identified an opportunity that they never thought of, or maybe you made a difficult decision easier for them to take because you've de-risked it with your analysis. Whatever it is, you worked with them to make their job easier, and together you're moving your business forward. And that's pretty special. But before we dive into that content, we want to do some introductions. So I'm lucky to be joined today by Julie Schauman, who is an analyst at Search Discovery, who works with clients across a variety of industries in optimization and in digital analytics. And she recently got engaged, which is what that super cute photo is of her on screen, and just bought a house. And she's living and residing in Cleveland currently. And fun fact about Julie is no matter what time of day it is or what day of the week it is, she always has Excel open unless she's playing around in R.
Thanks, Val. Yes, that is very true. And a little bit of background on Val is that she is an optimization director at Search Discovery, and she supports clients in highly regulated industries to help them build their experimentation program. And she actually currently lives in New York City, and she recently adopted a second dog. You can see her first little baby there, Kate, in Times Square. And a fun fact about Val is that she's an awful driver. I haven't gotten the chance to experience this myself, but this is a self-proclaimed fact that we joke about a lot since she lives in New York.
Yeah, you don't want me on the road.
And so now that you guys know a little bit about us, we want to talk about you. So we may not know you personally, but we definitely know why you're watching today. We know that in the experimentation program, there are a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of places you might run into some obstacles. A big one is finding time after you run a test and analyze it to put together some huge presentation for the outcome, let alone finding time on calendars to discuss this with everyone that needs to see it. Maybe because of that, you've even tried to just share out your analysis and maybe like a dashboard or something right after you finished it. And your stakeholders end up feeling like it's too detailed and in the weeds for them, and it's a little irrelevant to what they were looking for. But of course, the worst of all of these items here is that in the end, no actions are taken based on those results.
So now that we've adequately riled you up and reminded you of some of your worst memories or maybe some nightmares that you actively try to avoid in your job, I have some good news for you. And that good news is that there's probably way less information that you need to include in your action-focused story for your stakeholders than you might think. And so the formula that we've put together here is pretty simple. These are the only elements you need to include: why we tested, what was tested, some details around the outcome, learnings, and actions. That's it. That's all you need to summarize for your stakeholders what happened in that experiment and what we're going to do now that we know.
And then we want you to also utilize your analytics tool. I'm sure you all have one, and they're perfectly built for visualizing, sharing, governing, and recording your findings. They give you controls on how people view and understand your outcomes, and it allows you to widely share them out and really let people self-serve or even recreate your approach if they want to. For the rest of our presentation, we'll be using the Adobe stack, so Adobe Analytics and Adobe Target, but the approach we're going to be walking you through can be applied to any tool. And so here is our template. This is where the formula really comes to life in the analytics tool. And you can see we use 6 panels that collapse down into this really nice and user-friendly table of contents view. And each panel has a unique and clear purpose. And it lets us really look at our test from all the way from its creation down to its resulting learnings and actions.
So when you sit down to think about how you're going to build out this narrative, this story of each of these tests and experiments, we like to start at the end. And the end in mind, the optimal goal for any experimentation program is lots of actions based on these democratized learnings and insights. So you always want to keep that in mind. This is the lens that we're going to use for the rest of this presentation. And also, quick call out is that when we're talking about these stakeholders that you're going to be sharing this workspace with, this dashboard with, that definition is anyone who had a hand in getting that experiment live, making it come to life, whether it's your developers, designers, as well as anyone who could benefit from these learnings in their role, and especially those who can take action with those learnings.
And then to make sure you guys know this isn't just theoretical, we'll be walking you through a real life example from working with one of our own clients. And we will be talking about this exact example for the rest of the presentation, just as a call out that it's pretty important. And so our client is a B2B software company, and one of the most important things to know about them is that a lot of their business is actually done offline. The actual sales process of getting new customers set up on their software and then supporting them once they start to use it. And so that means that their website really was built to generate new leads for the sales team. And its main focus is to get these visitors to come in and fill out a form requesting a meeting or a call with a sales rep. And then the team we actually work with directly was in charge of a recent website redesign that the business went through. And they had redesigned the site to be a modular setup, making its layout really flexible, easy to move content around. But they knew that they initially had to roll out with a certain setup. And they also knew that that meant they wanted to start experimenting right away to try and determine the optimal setup of their website. And so, keeping all of that in mind, they had also done a digital behavior analysis where they found that when visitors came to their site and viewed a product page during the visit, they were more likely to fill out one of those lead forms than if they viewed an About Us page. And so that is what actually inspired our test idea that we'll be walking through today. They originally, on the homepage, they had two modules that were devoted to those two site sections that we just talked about. And they had About Us above the products module. And our idea was that if we flipped to have our products module above the About Us one on the homepage, we could drive more traffic to our product pages. And ultimately, we hoped to increase then the number of leads we were generating on the site.
Awesome. So now you heard a little bit about our example client and our example experiment. So we're going to dive into this template and how to actually visualize this story. So just to call out how this is organized is that I'm going to talk a little bit about what the information is, what to include, some things to think about, and in a summary form, and then we're going to jump to the way that Julie has it visualized in the actual dashboard itself. So first things first is describing why are you even running this test? It seems pretty basic, but including this information is what's going to really help your audience set the background for all the information they need to understand the rest of the story. So laying out your business case, talking about the opportunity, what is the premise for this? This is what's going to make sure, again, that everyone is able to follow the rest of the story. Really, really critical and important, especially if someone wasn't super involved with the launch of this particular experiment. Maybe they're familiar with other things that you're running in other areas of the site, but maybe this one's a little nuanced or different. So this is all those background details. So some things that you should include in this area are specifically what evidence you have and observations that you have that inspired this test idea or actually backed up how you deployed the specific experiment. You're also going to describe the test in the form of a really simple, succinct question, what we call the diet hypothesis statement, so that it can really just summarize what the opportunity is.
And so this part of the formula is going to live in our very first panel of the template. And this is where we really want to outline all those critical observations, like Val said, and the business opportunity that we saw by running this test. And one of the biggest call outs here is we want to make sure to utilize the headers of our visualizations to concisely tell somebody exactly what our data below is showing us, because we want them to be able to read through this dashboard. And again, in the idea of self-serving and the spirit of conserving our story, we don't want to leave things up to interpretation and make them have to look at the data and kind of draw that conclusion themselves. We want to tell them what we're showing them. And so for our test, our 2 observations that inspired it were that we found more users were converting in combination with viewing those product pages than About Us pages. And the other one was that even though that products module was lower on the homepage, it actually had twice as much engagement as our About Us module. So we knew people were interacting with it. Then directly below that is where we want to put that diet hypothesis statement Val discussed. Ours was, we'll pushing this content higher up on the homepage, increase interaction with the products module. And then in that description area is where we really want to make sure to tie it back to the business by outlining, why is this test beneficial? Why are we running it? You know, what is the point of it? And so we, of course, we're trying to increase the traffic to those product pages and ultimately trying to increase our number of leads. And so by running this test, we're able to understand the meaningful impact of that change and mitigate any risk to the business while doing so.
So now that you've outlined why it was even worth dedicating the resources to running this experiment, we're going to dive into the specific test itself. What was tested? So in this section is where you're going to talk about the experimental design at a high level and also your measurement plan. So first you want to familiarize your audience with this experiment. So one of the things that you can do to help make sure you're pulling someone into your story and making sure they can follow the narrative is familiarizing your audience with something familiar, which are the visuals. So maybe they don't necessarily understand all the nuances of maybe some of the audiences you talked about in your base case, but if you can pull someone into the visuals of where you tested this on the app, on the website, maybe that can help familiarize again with something familiar and pull them into what you're about to dive into. So where you ran this is really important to kind of put some boundaries around it so that someone understands exactly where the alterations to the experience appeared to the users. And then again, what people, so what audiences or key segments, or how did someone qualify for this experiment? So again, there's familiarity. Now you're going to talk about the measurement plan. And again, all of this was kind of decided upon and agreed with your stakeholders long before you press launch on your experiment, but it's a really good reminder so that people understand what ruler you're going to be using for the rest of this analysis to determine and define success. So here's where we go into our full-blown hypothesis statement with all the details so that we can pull out of it our primary KPI, as well as make sure everyone is able to put their hands on the secondary KPIs, anything else you use to measure for the full definition of success. Maybe it's a cannibalization analysis, maybe it's a down funnel analysis, but what else you used to analyze this specific experiment.
And so our second panel, the what was tested panel, is where we're going to use 4 sections to really outline all those important pieces that Val just talked about. And so at the very top of it, we want to start with that formal hypothesis. And this statement is really critical to make sure that your reader can understand exactly what was being tested. And we use the if then because framework because you can see that it's very clear about outlining the change that we were testing, what we thought the impact of it would be, and then why we believe that to be true. And then directly below that section is where we want to outline all the other details that are going to be important for your reader to understand while taking in the rest of your narrative. And so this part of it is really clean and succinct because we want it to be easy for them to pick out those important details and, again, self-serve, read the rest of the story, and have those key items kind of straight in their mind before they go deeper into our story. And so the first section is where we want to overview the test visuals and everything else that might have been in our test plan. But you'll notice that this part's really pretty short. We give them a little description of what Challenger looked like and what Control looked like, but in the end, we give them a link to go see those visuals if they would like, and then we give them a link to the test plan where they can see more of like the supporting metrics or any of the statistical parameters if they would like. And then below that is where we let them know that we only ran this test on the homepage, and we made sure that the test was only deployed to external prospects. It wasn't just given to everybody coming to our website. And then the final piece that you can see here is talking about our primary KPI. Again, you want to be really clear on what the exact definition is for that KPI because it's our only measure in the test backed by statistics, and we designed our entire test around it. So we don't want to leave that definition up to interpretation or any assumptions. So for us, we had chosen the metric that was closest to the action we were trying to influence. And so we were trying to get people to click through that products module. And so the KPI is the click-through rate of the products module on the homepage.
Now that you have your audience all on the same page with all the background information they need to know, now we're going to start to dive into the outcomes. So this section on voting is a little fun section that we like to include where we ask people in advance, which do you think will win? Which variation do you think will be our outcome? And you might do this with a poll with Outlook voting buttons or maybe a Google form, but it's a nice little interactive moment to have. It gets people invested in were they right or not. And two reasons why we really like to have this little moment with our audience is it's great for gamification and supporting experimentation culture. Like I said, people feel a little friendly competition. They're invested. They want to know, did they vote for the right variation and who didn't? Because that can always be fun. Maybe it's something that you track over time and throw out some prizes at the end. But also, I have been doing this since the first test that I ever ran on the American Medical Association's website when I was in-house. And to date, Scouts Honor, the majority has never gotten it right. And what a great way to prove the value of experimentation and testing than to show that if we had all sat around a table and debated this out and gone with our collective gut, that we could actually have damaged our business.
And we like this voting idea so much that we actually devoted our third panel to this exact experience, idea, fun game. And we were able to do it by sending out a Google form before the test launched to all of our stakeholders that knew about the test, and we had them vote on which one they thought would win. And then we took that data, uploaded it into Adobe Analytics, used a few classifications, and voila, we are able to visualize it right inside of our dashboard. And for our test, we actually found that only 40% of our stakeholders voted for the correct winner. So again, it just makes you think, what if we had listened to the majority's gut?
So now that you've had this little fun moment where people are checking whether or not they were in the successful group or not, here's the big reveal. And so we're first going to focus on the impact of the primary KPI, and we're separating this out from all other pieces of our analysis. We really want them to focus on what the impact and deltas were on our primary KPI. So here we're going to be really, really succinct and specific. First, we're going to use that headline space again to state the exact outcome. You're going to have a clear visualization that supports the impact on that KPI. And then you're going to talk about the call out of the business impact. So remember, this is an area where you want to be the translator between what the data is saying and what matters to your stakeholders. This is really, really, really critical here. Because to us as analysts, like a 1.8% conversion rate versus 2.1 means a lot to us. But sometimes that can be lost on your audience, especially if they're in sales or in marketing and they aren't as familiar with what some of those baseline stats are. But guess what does resonate with that audience? More leads. So if you can take that test and translate it to what that actually means in terms of business impact, that's how you're going to get people jazzed about what this test means to their role and your business at large. And a call out that maybe you didn't have a successful test outcome. Maybe your challenger actually was significantly worse than your control. That's okay. As we know, there are learnings and actions regardless of what the test outcome is. But if it's a loser, you can translate that business impact, not in terms of how many more leads you received, but how many butts you've saved by only deploying this as a test and not making this the default experience without an experiment first.
And so that is where we want to show them in our first or our fourth panel is that exact outcome that Val was talking about. And you'll notice that even expanded here in this view, it's not overly long. This is actually the most important piece of the dashboard. It's why we built it. It summarizes exactly what our test told us. It's kind of like the meat of everything. And so that's why we want to be really concise and clear and just let them know exactly what happened in the test without kind of adding in too much extra information that may detract from that. And so just like Val said, we want to start out without having them, having to guess what happened or searching for what happened. So right at the very top, we let them know, hey, for our test, the challenger was a winner, which is great. We saw a lift in our KPI that was higher than our designated NDE. And it's statistically significant and it's in the positive direction, which is what we wanted. And so this part is really important to ground your conclusion in the math that the test was designed around, because the math is the proof that our challenger caused a real difference in behavior in a positive way. And so once we've kind of taken care of that math piece and reminded them like that's what this is all based on, it is also important to let them know that you looked at that non-mathematical piece of addressing any other business concerns, because we need to make sure we look at any secondary metrics or guardrails from our test plan that would have affected if we declared this test a winner or not. And so for our test, we needed to make sure that by increasing the traffic to our products module, we actually didn't take away or cannibalize too much traffic to our About Us module or to the rest of our homepage. And so the good news was we found that there wasn't a large enough drop in anything that would cause for concern. So that's why this challenger is still considered the winner. And then after that part of kind of just talking about that primary KPI and what the test resulted in, we want to, again, tie it back to the business, translate that, so what does that mean? And so we started by showing them the exact number of clicks that the challenger drove over what the control drove. And we were able to then take that number of clicks and we extrapolated that out for what it would mean for the business. So we found that if we implemented the challenger for 6 months, we could see 47 new leads, which, okay, if we have a stakeholder reading this, they're going to be like, wow, like that's a lot, especially for a software company. It's not like they're getting maybe thousands of leads every day. So 47 in 6 months would be pretty big for our client. And then another call is that the way we did this is not the one and only way to go about it, but really you want to make sure that once you get your lift in your KPI, that you have a consistent way of estimating that impact lower in your funnel, maybe using historical data, conversion rates of, things like that. And then once you found that lower funnel impact that your stakeholder is going to care about, you want to find a realistic way to project that out over time. So that could be with a decay rate or something more sophisticated. But in the end, once you and your business and your team have decided what is the most realistic way to estimate this, it is important to keep that approach consistent across your test, because then your stakeholder trusts what you're telling them. They know it's kind of like this. Everybody's agreed on this approach. And it's a way to measure across your program, which is really helpful when you're looking at things, not just in a singular test.
All right, now the last part of the outcome and describing exactly what happened in this test is the secondary analysis. So here's where we're going to focus on the 3 S's: stakeholder questions, segmentation, and secondary KPIs. So we all know that there's going to be 1 or 2 people, maybe more, for some experiments who are nervous about running an experiment, or maybe they're like, that's never going to win. This is why this will never work. And so capturing those questions on the front end, especially during the planning phase, is so excellent, because then you get to address it on the back end. And maybe they're correct, and maybe you're going to be able to create an analysis that backs that gut opinion with some data, which would be amazing. But sometimes what's even better is to be like, actually no, and here's why. So having their stakeholder questions documented, especially those burning ones that you'll get, including them in this dashboard right here to put it out in the open for everyone to see, is going to be great. And then also you want to talk about all the other rocks that you turned over in your analysis phase when you were trying to figure out exactly how the alterations in this user experience altered their behavior. So we're going to talk about the impact on other key metrics or segments if there was something that stood out. So remember, we're putting together a story, we're crafting a very specific narrative. This is not show and tell. This is not the time to try to train your marketers or your product team to become analysts, because guess what? They probably didn't become analysts for very good reason. So you're only going to include these pieces if it adds to your story, if it helps color in the lines and paint the full picture of what happened with this experiment.
And so in our fifth panel, for all the reasons Val just talked about, that's exactly why we like to call it burning questions and things that popped. Because your burning questions are going to be any of those key stakeholder questions or worries that they had going into the test, and then maybe even any secondary hypotheses that have come up that you want to look at. And then things that popped are going to be those important findings that came from your initial analysis. Again, the call out here is that only the things that popped. I didn't copy paste my entire initial analysis when I was turning over rocks, as Val called it, into this section. This is a very clean, you know, show, and it's a very pretty, like, showy part of the dashboard. And so you want to make sure, again, that you're telling them exactly what you're looking into. What is the question I'm trying to answer? And then below that, in that description part, I'm answering it for the stakeholder immediately. Because again, if they don't want to look at our data, they shouldn't have to follow our story. And so for our test, we had 3 main questions that we wanted to include here. And actually, 2 of these questions were around stakeholder concerns and guardrail metrics from our test plan when we were looking into if our test would be cannibalizing too much traffic. And so both of those questions were trying to answer, you know, would we change our outcome of our test? They were part of our definition of success. And so that's why we actually mentioned them back in our conclusion for our primary KPI. And if you recall, we had looked into both of those, and based on the thresholds in our test plan, we said that there wasn't anything to worry about. But if we look at question 1, it's actually different. It's asking about the impact that Challenger had on lead form interactions and lead form submissions. So it's really focused on those lower funnel metrics around the website's main goal. And so diving a little deeper into that first question, we had found that Challenger actually had more form views and more form submissions than Control. And when looking at the form conversion rate, it was higher than Control by about 30%, which is huge. That's great news for our test, because not only did we already see that our test had a positive effect on that upper part of our funnel of getting people to click through to our product pages, but now we've also seen that it had a positive effect on the goal of our entire website. And then one last call out for this section, you want to make sure that you're really conversational and clear. If there's anything that you would call out to someone face to face, or there's a number you want to explain, or there's a nuance going on, make sure you put it in there in a really easy to read way, so it doesn't leave them guessing. Because believe it or not, when we look at this question 2 about cannibalization, we have a big red number sitting in the middle of our dashboard. And I'm going to bet that our stakeholder is going to come in here and read this and be like, oh my God, what has dropped 53%? Like, that concerns me. I don't want to see that. Like, how come we're not talking about this? So we did talk about it. We said, all right, not to worry. Don't worry. This was looked at. This was deemed as okay, because in our test plan, we said we were willing to take a hit to the traffic to the About Us module by 55%. So at 53, we're still in the clear. We didn't hit the threshold, so it's fine. And then we also did include the link to the test plan here, as well as further up in our dashboard, just to make it easy if they want to go kind of check out this threshold themselves.
So now that you've described exactly what happened in this experiment, it's time to wrap it up and put a bow on top. We're going to dive into the learnings and the actions at the same time here, because this is where you're completing that test and learn life cycle. So as previously stated, we all know, regardless of a test outcome, we have learnings and we have actions. And so here's where we're not going to leave any guesswork. We're going to denote them. So we're going to talk about what we learned from this experiment. What are we going to do now that we know? And if you are already able to talk about what we're testing next, or what deep dive analyses we're going to take, what new hypotheses we came up with, we're going to list them out here, because it's really special to kind of tie that into what's next. And make sure you're taking this opportunity to make sure that your stakeholders are comfortable with failure. So no one wants to invest a ton of time and get super jazzed and excited about an experiment for it to come back as no winner or, maybe even worse than you thought. But if you're trying to get them to focus on what we learn from each of these experiments, there should be way less weight on the wins and more on the insights. And so again, best-in-class testing programs have that 25 to 30% win rate. We try to focus less on that and just get them to focus on insights or an insight rate. So tying all this together to the learnings and what we're going to do now that we know is going to be really, really important to getting everyone comfortable with engaging with experimentation and with letting them suggest to you some other opportunities where experimentation can support your business.
And so here in our sixth and final panel is where we're going to neatly wrap up and summarize everything that came out of our entire effort of this test. So everything it's amounted to. And another call is that you will build this out no matter the outcome, like Val said, because either way we've gained some kind of new knowledge and we want to document it and we want to determine what those next steps are going to be like to be taken based on the outcomes. And so the main part for this is that you set up and highlight the one-to-one relationship between your learnings and your actions, because for every learning, there's going to be a corresponding action to be taken. So for example, our main learning was that placing that products module higher on the homepage led to an increase in content engagement, form submissions, and improved page interaction. And then the action coming out of that is that the marketing team is going to make this a permanent change in production and then add the findings to the learning library. And then for our other two learnings that came out of this, they're both pretty similar, where we're looking at what are some other optimizations we could take around the content inside of our module now that we've determined its best placement. And so then these new ideas will be captured in the hypothesis library for further testing. And then one last call out on this section, even though for our specific test we didn't have one, a lot of times there can also be more operational learnings that you gain from a test. So if you found that your test it had a delay in getting launched because of some legal processes that needed to happen, then your learning coming out of that would be that legal should be pulled into your process earlier on so that your later tests aren't slowed down. This will really help to be captured here because it can help improve your entire testing process. And then at the very bottom of your dashboard, we always think you should include your contact information. You really want it to kind of be this open invitation throughout your organization as this dashboard is shared around, that people can come and talk to you about the test or about the program. Maybe they have questions, or if they're one of those people that decided to dig in deeper into the data themselves, maybe they have some other insights or even better, some new hypotheses. And so congratulations, we've officially made it to the end of the template. We now have this beautiful complete dashboard. Our full story is laid out. We're ready to go inspire stakeholders to take action. But we do want to leave you guys with some guidelines. So the first one is, this isn't used to monitor your test. But what is a test monitoring dashboard then? Well, it's actually its own separate dashboard that's only used while the test is live, because we want to make sure our test is healthy and able to continue running. Really, it's to make sure that your test isn't causing some mass chaos to the website or the business outside of the scope it was supposed to affect. Another thing is, if you see this dashboard, you'll see, yes, we're looking at our main KPI and whatnot, but it doesn't count as peaking because we're not running a t-test on it and we're not drawing any conclusions until we know we've reached our sample size. And then you may also be thinking back to our template that we just went through, and you may have noticed that there were quite a few things that we didn't include. We didn't ever list out any statistical significance levels. We never put who signed off or timelines or delays. And we didn't even include any sort of list of control and challenger and secondary metrics for each that we looked at. But before you come for me in the Q&A, we do agree that all these pieces of information are really important to your experimentation process. They're vital for you and your team, and they need to be recorded somewhere. It's just that this dashboard isn't the place. It's not going to add to your story at all. It really might just end up muddying the waters, and in the end, it's going to increase the length and the density of your workspace that you're sharing out to all these stakeholders.
And this editing component is really, really critical to making sure that you're building out that narrative that your stakeholders care about. And all that extra information that Julia's referred to, if you were to put that in there, it would take away from that story. But I think I know why, as experimenters, we're so tempted to put all this information in there. It's because as experimenters, we wear a lot of hats. Sometimes we're the statistician, sometimes we're a copywriter, sometimes we're the QA specialist. I know that I personally have sometimes felt like the hostage negotiator over who gets the real estate on the homepage hero. But one thing to keep in mind is it doesn't matter how hard it was for you to create this test or how cool your insights are. If you can't concisely communicate that to the people who can take action on it, it doesn't matter. It's like it never happened. So again, super important to make sure that you're building the story that your stakeholders and your audience want to hear. And if you're not the analyst who puts together these workspaces yourself, maybe you're managing a team of analysts who would be putting something like this together. Send them along this presentation, send them these slides, ask them to take a crack at it, but also make sure that you're also creating another opportunity separate where you can ask a little bit more about what's going on underneath the hood. Maybe you want to ask, how do you extrapolate out business impact? I think that would be a really successful, productive conversation. It would help you as a manager advocate and evangelize the power of testing in meetings where maybe your analyst team isn't typically invited, but even better, maybe it turns into additional hypotheses or opportunities for your program moving forward. So just want to call out a couple benefits of using this templatized approach. The first is that your audience expectations are set. People know what they're going to get. When you're running a test, they know that it's going to come with this type of story and narrative built out just for them to better understand what happened and what they can do now that they know. And also, if they do take advantage of reaching out to you with some deep dive question, they know that you're going to have that answer because there was a whole lot more in your analysis workspace that you edited out, again, because you're building a story for them. The second is it's going to be easier for you to automate your process. As an analyst, you don't want to be spending your time in slideware or editing, building out dashboards for the first time. So it's going to help you run through these quicker, which is really critical if you're running a high velocity program. And lastly, is that this follows a classic storytelling arc. So if you think about setting the stage, the building of the tension, the climax, following action resolution, well, you can map each part of our presentation that we just walked through on this exact curve. And you want to know what else you can map on this curve? Disney movies and classic literature. Our brains are almost primed to hear stories this way, so why not capitalize on that and use this as part of your template and formula?
And now you might be thinking, well, if I take this back to my organization, who do I share this with? Well, we've built this out to try and help you kind of determine that. The first one is if they already have access to Adobe Workspace or your analytics tool that you're using, absolutely send them the link. It's easy for them to get into it. They know what they're going to be looking at and they can read your story. Now, if they don't already have access, but this person could take action based on what you found in your test, you should absolutely still send them this. You could send it as a PDF most of the time, or if this is a chance to educate them and get them in the tool, because if you're automating this, you'll be using it again. It's a great opportunity to get them involved and get them that readout. If neither of those first two things were true for this person, but they helped you get the test out the door, again, we really think you should be sending them this dashboard because this is a really good way to loop them back in at the end and let them see the fruits of their labor, especially if this is someone that you're hoping will be working with you again and again. It's a good way to get them to buy into your program and what they can help with. And then our last question here to help you decide is it worth your time to put together an entire presentation just to talk to this person and tell them your story? If it's a no, we definitely think you should utilize the dashboard that you took the time to build and lay out your story in. But if the answer is yes, it's probably someone pretty high up in leadership, maybe even your C-suite, and we really think you should take that opportunity to get in front of them and talk to them about your test and your program and get them to buy in as well.
So in summary, 3 things we would love for you to walk away with is to keep in mind that as an analyst, as an experimenter, your goal is to inspire action amongst your audience because that's how experimentation drives business impact. So let's tell the story that they want to hear. The second is that using automation for parts of your process is what's going to unlock time for you and let you focus on your high value work, which is only going to be good in the end for your program and your business. And lastly, to never waste any opportunity to evangelize the power of experimentation or the role it can play within your organization. So make sure you're maximizing every single touch point. And then we want to leave you with some goodies. So if you follow this bit.ly, you're going to end up on a page with these 4 resources. One are the slides from this presentation. The second is a step-by-step instruction guide on how to build out your first test results dashboard in Adobe Analytics, and then you can save that down as a template. Super detailed instructions that Julie put together, really easy to understand. Definitely recommend that, especially if you're an Adobe user. Really great way to save yourself some time. Third is a link to a blog post on the test monitoring dashboard that Julie mentioned. So what do we recommend you think about looking at during the actual test fielding period? So we have some suggestions in there and some details on how you might build that out. And then lastly, if you are taking advantage of this opportunity to put together a PowerPoint presentation, we have a template that you can download that kind of follows this exact same story, but more appropriate for slide format. So with that, I will say thank you for joining us for this deep dive conversation into how to present test results in your analysis workspace that's going to inspire action. We love experimentation and nerding out on this topic. So if you would like to continue the conversation, here's how you can get a hold of us. Thanks so much. Bye.